The dust swirled around Jack McKenna's weathered boots as he guided his horse through the rocky canyon outside Silver Ridge. The sun blazed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the desert landscape. Jack had been riding alone for 3 days, searching for stray cattle that had wandered from his small ranch. At 42, he was a man who preferred solitude to the company of others, finding peace in the endless expanse of the frontier. Jack's life had been marked by loss and hardship. His wife Sarah had died of fever 5 years earlier, leaving him to tend their modest spread alone. Their dreams of raising a family and building a prosperous ranch had died with her. Since then, Jack had become increasingly isolated, speaking only when necessary to traders and fellow ranchers. His only companions were his faithful horse Thunder and his loyal dog Rex, who had passed away the previous winter. As Jack crested a small hill, he heard the sound of voices carried on the desert wind. Something about the tone made him pause and strain his ears. These weren't the casual conversations of travelers or the calls of fellow cowboys. There was an urgency, an edge of fear that set his nerves on alert. Jack had learned to trust his instincts during his years on the frontier, and those instincts now told him that something was very wrong. Following the voices, Jack rode carefully through a maze of red rocks and scattered boulders. The sound grew clearer as he approached, and he could make out angry shouts and what sounded like crying. Jack dismounted and crept forward on foot, leading Thunder by the reins. What he saw when he peered around a large boulder made his blood run cold. 7 young Apache women were bound together with thick ropes, their hands tied behind their backs. They ranged in age from what appeared to be 16 to perhaps 25. Their traditional clothing was torn and dirty, suggesting they had been captives for some time. Their faces showed a mixture of defiance and terror as they faced their captors. Standing around the women were 6 men in mismatched clothing, clearly not soldiers or lawmen. Jack recognized the type immediately: drifters, bounty hunters, and worse. Their leader was a tall, thin man with a scar running down his left cheek. He wore a black hat pulled low over his eyes and spoke with a gravelly voice that carried clearly across the canyon. "You Apache witches brought this on yourselves," the scarred man was saying. "The good people of Silver Ridge won't stand for your kind stealing their children and cursing their crops. Judge Morrison has declared you all guilty of witchcraft and sentenced you to hang. We're just carrying out justice." One of the women, who appeared to be the eldest, spoke up in accented but clear English. "We have done nothing wrong. We gather herbs for healing, nothing more. You white men see evil where there is only knowledge passed down from our grandmothers." The scarred man backhanded her across the face, causing her to stumble. "Shut your lying mouth, witch. We know what we've seen. Crops failing wherever you've been spotted, children getting sick after you've passed through town. The judge has all the evidence he needs." Jack's hands clenched into fists as he watched the brutality unfold. He had lived on the frontier long enough to know that tensions between settlers and Apache were common, but this felt different. Something about the men's behavior suggested this wasn't about justice or even revenge. There was a calculated coldness to their actions that spoke of other motives. As Jack continued to observe, he noticed several things that didn't add up. First, the men were far too well equipped for simple vigilantes. Their weapons were new and expensive, their horses were strong and well-fed. Second, they kept referring to specific instructions from Judge Morrison, but Jack knew Morrison to be a fair man who wouldn't order executions without proper trials. Third, and most telling, was a conversation he overheard between 2 of the captors. "How much did Whitman say we'd get for this job?" one man whispered to another. $500 each, plus whatever we can take from their camp afterward. Easy money for getting rid of some troublemakers. The mention of Whitman sent a chill down Jack's spine. Thomas Whitman was Silver Ridge's wealthiest resident, owner of several mines and a large cattle operation. Jack had had dealings with Whitman before and found him to be ruthless in his business practices. If Whitman was paying these men to kill the Apache women, it wasn't about witchcraft or stolen children. It was about something far more sinister. Jack counted the men again and assessed their weapons. 6 armed men against 1. The odds weren't good, but he couldn't stand by and watch innocent women be murdered. His mind raced as he tried to formulate a plan. A direct confrontation would likely get him killed and wouldn't save the women. He needed to be smart about this. The scarred leader was examining a pocket watch. "We'll wait until sunset," he announced. "Make sure nobody comes looking for them during the hanging. Johnson, you and Peters keep watch on the ridge. Martinez, get the ropes ready. The rest of you make sure our horses are ready for a quick departure." This gave Jack some time to act, but not much. The sun was already beginning its descent toward the horizon. He estimated he had maybe 2 hours before the men carried out their grisly plan. Jack quietly led Thunder back the way he had come, putting distance between himself and the camp before he dared to mount up again. Once safely away, Jack's mind worked furiously. He couldn't ride to Silver Ridge for help. It was too far away, and by the time he returned with assistance, the women would be dead. He couldn't take on 6 armed men in a straight fight, but perhaps he didn't need to fight them all at once. Jack remembered an old Apache technique he had learned from a friend years ago. During his early days on the frontier, he had befriended an Apache scout named Running Wolf, who had taught him various survival skills. One technique involved creating distractions and picking off enemies one by one, using the terrain to your advantage. The canyon where the men were camped had several narrow passages and blind spots. If Jack could create enough confusion, he might be able to even the odds significantly. He began gathering materials for his plan: dry brush for smoke, rocks for noise, and anything else that might serve as a distraction. As Jack prepared for what might be the most dangerous undertaking of his life, he thought about Sarah and the conversations they used to have about doing what's right, even when it's difficult. She would have wanted him to help these women, regardless of the personal cost. The memory of her voice strengthened his resolve. The first phase of Jack's plan involved reconnaissance. He spent the next hour carefully mapping out the canyon, noting every possible escape route, hiding spot, and vantage point. The men had chosen their location well from a defensive standpoint, but they had also trapped themselves in a relatively confined space. This could work to Jack's advantage if he played his cards right. As the afternoon wore on, Jack noticed that the guards were becoming complacent. They were confident in their numbers and isolation, never suspecting that anyone else knew of their location. This overconfidence would be their downfall. Jack also observed the Apache women more closely. Despite their bonds and dire situation, they remained alert and aware of their surroundings. The eldest woman, who seemed to be their leader, was quietly communicating with the others using subtle gestures and expressions. Jack realized that if he could free even 1 or 2 of them, they might prove to be valuable allies rather than helpless victims. The sun continued its relentless march toward the western horizon, and Jack knew that time was running out. He checked his weapons one final time: his Colt revolver with 6 shots, his rifle with a handful of cartridges, and his knife. Not much against 6 men, but it would have to do. As shadows began to lengthen across the canyon floor, Jack said a silent prayer and began to put his desperate plan into action. The lives of 7 innocent women depended on his success, and failure wasn't an option he was willing to consider. The first phase involved getting closer to the camp without being detected. Jack left Thunder hidden in a small grove of trees about half a mile away, then began his careful approach on foot. Every step had to be calculated, every sound minimized. The rocky terrain provided good cover, but it also created numerous opportunities for loose stones to betray his presence. As Jack drew nearer to the camp, he could hear the men talking and laughing, seemingly unconcerned about their gruesome task ahead. Their casual attitude toward murder only strengthened Jack's determination to stop them. These weren't men driven by righteous anger or fear. They were cold-blooded killers motivated by money. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test every skill Jack had learned during his years on the unforgiving frontier. 7 lives hung in the balance, and the sun was running out of sky. Jack moved like a shadow through the rocky terrain, his heart pounding as he approached the camp. The hired killers had grown lazy in the afternoon heat, with only one man actively watching while the others dozed or played cards. Jack knew this was his only chance to turn the odds in his favor. His first target was the lookout posted on the eastern ridge. Jack crept up behind the man, who was more interested in watching his companions below than scanning for threats. In one swift motion, Jack struck the guard with the butt of his rifle, knocking him unconscious. He quickly bound and gagged the man with strips torn from his own shirt, then took his weapons. The second phase of Jack's plan involved creating chaos and confusion. He had gathered armfuls of dry brush and strategically placed them around the canyon in positions where the wind would carry smoke directly into the camp. Using matches from the unconscious guard's pocket, Jack lit the brush piles simultaneously, creating several columns of thick, choking smoke. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The men in the camp began coughing and shouting, scrambling to understand what was happening. In the confusion, Jack picked off another guard who had wandered too close to one of his hiding spots. The man never saw the blow coming and crumpled silently to the ground. "What the hell is going on?" shouted the scarred leader, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Where's Johnson? Peters, can you see anything through this smoke?" "Can't see nothing, boss," came the reply. "Smoke's too thick. Maybe lightning hit something." Jack smiled grimly. The men were already panicking, and he had barely begun. Moving carefully through the smoke, he managed to get within 20 feet of the bound Apache women. The eldest woman saw him first, her eyes widening in surprise. Jack pressed a finger to his lips, indicating silence, then held up 4 fingers to show how many men remained active. The woman nodded almost imperceptibly and began subtly alerting her sisters to Jack's presence. Their years of survival on the harsh frontier had taught them to remain calm in dangerous situations, and they showed no outward sign of hope or excitement that might alert their captors. As the smoke began to clear, Jack realized he needed to accelerate his timeline. The remaining 4 men were regrouping and would soon realize they were under attack. He had managed to acquire 3 additional weapons from the men he had taken down, giving him more firepower, but he was still outnumbered. Jack decided to try a different approach. Instead of continuing to pick off the men individually, he would attempt to negotiate from a position of strength. He had seen enough of their operation to understand what was really happening, and he suspected the hired killers might be willing to cut their losses rather than risk their lives for Whitman's money. "You men in the camp!" Jack called out from his concealed position behind a large boulder. "This is Jack McKenna. I've got you surrounded, and I've already taken down 2 of your boys. I know Thomas Whitman is paying you to murder these women, and I've got evidence to prove it." The camp fell silent except for the sound of men scrambling for better defensive positions. After a moment, the scarred leader's voice rang out across the canyon. "McKenna, I know you, Cowboy. You're that hermit from the northern range. What makes you think you can take on professionals like us?" "Because I know what you're really up to," Jack replied, keeping his voice steady and confident. "This isn't about witchcraft or stolen children. Whitman wants these women dead because they know something about his mining operations, something worth killing for." There was another long silence, and Jack could almost hear the wheels turning in the leader's mind. Finally, the man spoke again, his tone more calculating than angry. "Even if that were true, which it ain't, what's it to you? These are just Apache squaws. Nobody's gonna miss them." Jack's anger flared at the casual racism and disregard for human life, but he kept his voice level. "These are innocent women, and I won't stand by while they're murdered for money. You boys can ride out of here right now, and nobody has to die today. Keep going with this, and some of you won't see tomorrow." "You're bluffing, McKenna," came another voice. "One man can't take all of us." To emphasize his point, Jack fired a carefully aimed shot that struck the coffee pot sitting by their fire, sending hot liquid and metal fragments flying. The men dove for cover, cursing loudly. "That was just a warning," Jack called out. "The next one won't be. I can pick you off one by one from up here, and you'll never see it coming." The psychological warfare was working. Jack could hear heated whispered arguments breaking out among the remaining men. These were hired killers, not soldiers fighting for a cause. Their loyalty extended only as far as their pay, and the prospect of dying for Whitman's money was becoming less appealing by the minute. While the men argued among themselves, Jack noticed that one of the Apache women had managed to work her hands partially free from her bonds. She was the youngest of the group, probably around 16, with nimble fingers and determination in her dark eyes. Jack caught her attention and gestured toward a knife he could see lying near the camp's edge, apparently dropped by one of the men during the confusion. The young woman understood immediately. Using tiny, almost imperceptible movements, she began working her way toward the knife while her sisters created subtle distractions by shifting positions and asking their captors for water. The standoff continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. Jack knew that time was not on his side. Eventually, the men would realize that he was likely alone and would attempt to rush his position. He needed to force the issue before they organized an effective counterattack. "I'm losing patience," Jack announced. "I'm going to count to 10. If you men aren't riding out of here by then, I start shooting to kill." "You're making a big mistake, McKenna," the scarred leader shouted back. "Whitman's got powerful friends. You cross him, and you'll have the law down on you like thunder." 1, 2, Jack began counting, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "This is crazy," he heard one of the men hiss. "We're not getting paid enough to die for this job." 3, 4, Jack continued, noting the growing panic in the men's voices. "Maybe we should just take what we can and get out of here," another voice suggested. "Those Apache probably don't know nothing important anyway." 5, 6. By now, the youngest Apache woman had managed to reach the knife and was carefully cutting through the ropes binding her wrists. Her movements were so subtle that even Jack almost missed them. He had to admire her courage and skill. 7, 8. All right. The scarred leader's voice cracked with frustration and fear. "We're leaving. But this ain't over, McKenna. Whitman's gonna hear about this." Jack waited until he heard the sound of horses being hastily saddled and men mounting up. Through the settling dust and smoke, he watched as 4 riders galloped out of the canyon, leaving their unconscious companions behind. Only when he was certain they were truly gone did he emerge from his hiding place. The Apache women looked up at him with a mixture of gratitude and wariness as he approached. The youngest had finished cutting herself free and was now working on the other's bonds. Jack kept his weapons visible but pointed down, not wanting to frighten them after their ordeal. "Are any of you hurt?" Jack asked in the few Apache words he knew, supplemented with English and gestures. The eldest woman, who seemed to be their leader, responded in careful English. "We are not harmed, only frightened and angry. You saved our lives. Why would you risk yourself for us?" Jack thought about the question as he helped cut the remaining ropes. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said simply. "Those men weren't interested in justice. They were paid killers, and you were innocent." As the women regained feeling in their hands and feet, Jack learned more about their situation. They were indeed gatherers of medicinal plants, traveling between Apache settlements to trade their knowledge and herbs. They had been camping near Silver Ridge when Whitman's men had captured them 3 days earlier. "The white man with scars told us we were accused of witchcraft," explained the eldest woman, whose name was Maria. "But we know this is not true reason. 2 days before capture, we saw white men at Sacred Spring where we gather special herbs. They were pouring something into water that made plants around it die. Jack's blood ran cold as he realized the implications. What kind of something? Chemicals? Poison? We do not know white man's words for it, Maria continued, but it came from metal containers with writing. The men saw us watching and became very angry. They chased us, but we escaped that time. Now Jack understood the real reason Whitman wanted these women dead. They had witnessed him or his men poisoning the water source, probably to sabotage someone else's land or mining claims. If the Apache women testified about what they had seen, it could destroy Whitman's reputation and business empire. We need to get you somewhere safe, Jack told them. And then we need to make sure people know what really happened here. But even as he spoke, Jack realized that their troubles were far from over. Whitman was a powerful man with connections throughout the territory. Simply escaping this immediate threat wouldn't be enough to protect the women in the long term. They would need solid evidence of Whitman's crimes and allies willing to stand up against his influence. The young woman who had freed herself introduced herself as Dawn. She spoke English better than the others and had clearly been paying close attention during their captivity. The men talked much when they thought we could not understand, Dawn said. They spoke of papers hidden in a place called the Silver Dollar. They said these papers would make their boss very rich and many other men very poor. Jack knew the Silver Dollar well. It was Silver Ridge's most popular saloon and gambling house, also owned by Thomas Whitman. If important documents were hidden there, it might be the evidence they needed to expose Whitman's criminal operations. As the sun finally touched the horizon, painting the canyon walls in shades of red and gold, Jack and the 7 Apache women began planning their next move. They had won this battle, but the war for justice was just beginning. And somewhere out there, Thomas Whitman was probably already planning his revenge. Jack and the 7 Apache women made their way carefully through the desert night toward Silver Ridge. They had decided that their best chance for justice lay in gathering evidence of Whitman's crimes before he could cover his tracks or send more men after them. The 2 unconscious guards had been tied up and left in the canyon with enough water to survive, but their weapons had been taken to prevent pursuit. Dawn rode beside Jack on one of the horses left behind by the fleeing gunmen. Her knowledge of English and what she had overheard during their captivity made her an invaluable ally. The other women followed on foot, moving silently through the darkness with the natural stealth of their people. "The papers they spoke of," Dawn whispered as they approached the outskirts of Silver Ridge. "They said Whitman keeps them in a safe, behind a painting of a white horse." The men laughed about how easy it would be to take them if they wanted to. Jack nodded grimly. Breaking into Whitman's saloon would be dangerous, but it might be their only chance to get the evidence they needed. As they reached the edge of town, Jack called a halt to survey the situation. Silver Ridge was a typical frontier town, with a main street lined by businesses and homes spreading out in all directions. The Silver Dollar Saloon sat prominently in the center of town, its windows glowing with lamplight even at this late hour. Music and laughter drifted from within, suggesting business was good despite the hour. "We need to be smart about this," Jack told the women. "If Whitman's men are back in town, they'll be watching for us. And if we're caught breaking into the saloon, the local sheriff might not ask questions before he starts shooting." Maria, the eldest woman, placed a weathered hand on Jack's shoulder. "You have already risked much for us, Jack McKenna. We cannot ask you to risk more." "You're not asking," Jack replied firmly. "I'm volunteering. Besides, if we don't stop Whitman now, he'll keep hurting people. Those chemicals you saw him putting in the water could poison entire communities." They decided to split up to minimize the risk of detection. The Apache women would circle around to the back of the saloon, while Jack created a distraction at the front. If things went wrong, they were to scatter and meet at an old abandoned mine shaft about 2 miles north of town that Dawn had spotted during their approach. Jack waited until the women were in position, then walked boldly up to the saloon's front entrance. He had cleaned himself up as much as possible, but he still looked like a man who had been in a fight. This would actually work in his favor for what he had planned. The Silver Dollar was crowded with cowboys, miners, and drifters, all drinking and gambling their pay away. Jack spotted Thomas Whitman immediately. He was a large man with graying hair and expensive clothes, holding court at a corner table with several other well-dressed men. Jack also noticed two of the men from the canyon sitting at the bar, looking nervous and drinking heavily. Jack pushed through the crowd toward Whitman's table, making sure to bump into several patrons along the way. By the time he reached Whitman, he had the attention of half the saloon. "Thomas Whitman," Jack said loudly, swaying slightly as if he had been drinking. "I need to talk to you about a job. Heard you pay good money for men who can handle trouble." Whitman looked up with barely concealed annoyance. "I'm afraid you have me confused with someone else, Cowboy. I'm a legitimate businessman." "Oh, come now," Jack continued, raising his voice even more. "Everyone knows you hire men for special jobs, like the boys you sent out to the canyon today. Heard they ran into some trouble with a hermit." The saloon began to quiet down as patrons sensed drama unfolding. Whitman's face darkened, and Jack could see the man's companions reaching for their weapons. This was exactly the distraction he had hoped for. "I think you've had too much to drink, friend," Whitman said dangerously. "Maybe you should head home before you say something you'll regret." "Regret?" Jack laughed loudly. "The only thing I regret is not getting in on the action sooner. Poisoning water sources, murdering Apache women, falsifying mining claims sounds like profitable work for a man with the stomach for it." The entire saloon fell silent. Jack had just publicly accused the town's wealthiest citizen of serious crimes. Whitman stood slowly, his hand moving toward the gun at his hip. "Mister, you just made the biggest mistake of your life," Whitman growled. At that moment, Dawn appeared in the saloon's back doorway, holding a leather portfolio high above her head. "The papers!" she shouted in clear English. "We have the papers that prove everything!" Chaos erupted in the Silver Dollar. Whitman's men drew their guns, but Jack was already moving. He overturned the heavy table, sending drinks and chips flying, then dove behind it as bullets began to fly. Other patrons scrambled for cover or rushed for the exits. Dawn disappeared back through the rear door, just as Jack had hoped she would. The Apache women had successfully retrieved the evidence, and now his job was to escape alive and meet up with them. But Whitman and his men weren't about to let that happen easily. "Kill him!" Whitman shouted over the gunfire. "Kill them all! And get those papers back!" Jack returned fire from behind the overturned table, trying to work his way toward the front door. But more of Whitman's men were pouring into the saloon, cutting off his escape route. Just when the situation seemed hopeless, unexpected help arrived. Sheriff Tom Brady burst through the front doors with two deputies, guns drawn. Brady was an honest lawman whom Jack had known for years, and his arrival changed everything. "What the hell is going on in here?" Brady shouted. "Everyone drop your weapons!" "Sheriff!" Whitman called out, his voice suddenly reasonable and concerned. "This madman attacked us. He's working with Apache raiders. They broke into my establishment and stole valuable documents." But Jack was ready for this accusation. "Sheriff Brady, I've got 7 Apache women outside who witnessed Whitman poisoning water sources. And those stolen documents will prove he's been falsifying mining claims and murdering anyone who gets in his way." Brady looked from Jack to Whitman, his experienced eyes taking in the scene. "Where are these women, Jack?" "Out back." "With the evidence," Jack replied. "But you'd better hurry. Whitman's already sent killers after them once today." The sheriff made his decision quickly. "Martinez, Rodriguez, secure this building. Nobody leaves until we get to the bottom of this." He turned to Whitman. "Mr. Whitman, I'm going to need to see those documents." "Those papers were stolen from my private safe," Whitman protested. "This is outrageous." "Then you won't mind if we take a look at them," Brady replied calmly. "If they're yours as you claim, they should prove your innocence." Within minutes, Brady had examined the portfolio that Dawn had retrieved. The documents told a damning story of forged mining claims, bribes to territorial officials, and detailed plans to drive competitors out of business through sabotage and intimidation. One document even contained a list of problems to be eliminated with the names of several missing persons who had opposed Whitman's operations. But the most damning evidence was a detailed map showing water sources throughout the territory, with notes about which ones had been treated with chemicals to make the land appear worthless. Whitman had been systematically poisoning water supplies, then buying up the supposedly worthless land at bargain prices before discovering valuable mineral deposits. As Brady read through the documents, Whitman's face grew increasingly pale. Several of his hired men began edging toward the exits, realizing that their employer's downfall was imminent. "Thomas Whitman," Sheriff Brady announced loudly enough for everyone in the saloon to hear, "you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, attempted murder, and accessory to murder. Boys, put the irons on him." Whitman's capture sent shockwaves through Silver Ridge and the surrounding territory. The man who had been one of the region's most powerful figures was revealed to be a ruthless criminal who had built his empire on violence and deception. The evidence found in his safe led to the arrest of dozens of accomplices, including corrupt officials who had taken his bribes. For Jack and the 7 Apache women, Whitman's downfall meant safety and justice. The territorial government, embarrassed by the corruption that had been exposed, went out of its way to make amends with the local Apache communities. Maria and her sisters were not only cleared of all accusations, but were formally recognized as key witnesses whose courage had exposed a major criminal conspiracy. Dawn, who had shown remarkable bravery and intelligence throughout the ordeal, was offered a position as an interpreter and liaison between the territorial government and Apache communities. Her ability to bridge two worlds made her invaluable in the new era of cooperation that followed Whitman's exposure. Jack found himself something of a hero throughout the territory, though he was uncomfortable with the attention. Newspapers from as far away as Denver wrote about the solitary cowboy who took on corruption and won. But Jack's greatest satisfaction came from knowing that justice had been served and that innocent lives had been saved. In the weeks following the events at Silver Ridge, Jack discovered that his life had changed in ways he hadn't expected. The Apache community, grateful for his intervention, began visiting his ranch regularly. They brought gifts of food and crafts and shared their knowledge of desert survival and plant medicine. For the first time since Sarah's death, Jack found himself part of a community again. Maria became a particular friend, often stopping by to check on Jack's health and share stories of her people's history. Through these visits, Jack learned that the Apache had their own code of honor that valued courage, loyalty, and protection of the innocent above all else. He realized that in saving the 7 women, he had gained not just their gratitude, but their eternal friendship. The spring where Whitman had been dumping chemicals was cleaned and restored with the help of territorial engineers and Apache traditional knowledge. It became a symbol of cooperation between cultures and the possibility of healing even the most damaged places. Dawn visited Jack's ranch several months later, bringing news that Whitman had been sentenced to life in prison for his crimes. Many of his accomplices had received lengthy sentences as well, and the territorial government had established new oversight procedures to prevent similar corruption in the future. "You changed everything that day in the canyon," Dawn told Jack, as they sat on his porch watching the sunset. "Not just for my sisters and me, but for all the people Whitman was hurting." Jack shook his head modestly. "I just did what any one decent person would do." "No," Dawn replied firmly. "Most people would have ridden away. They would have told themselves it wasn't their problem or that they couldn't make a difference. You chose to act when action was dangerous and difficult. That made all the difference." As the months turned into years, Jack's ranch became an unofficial meeting place between Apache and white communities. People came to trade goods, share information, and resolve disputes peacefully. Jack found that his years of solitude had ended, replaced by a life rich with friendship and purpose. The 7 Apache women all went on to lead productive lives, using their experience to help bridge cultural divides throughout the territory. They never forgot the cowboy who had risked everything to save them, and their children and grandchildren would grow up hearing stories of Jack McKenna's courage. Jack himself lived to be an old man, respected throughout the territory as someone who could be trusted to do the right thing regardless of the personal cost. He never remarried, but he was never truly alone again. The bonds forged in that desert canyon proved stronger than blood, creating a family based not on shared ancestry, but on shared values and mutual respect. The story of the solitary cowboy who rescued 7 Apache sisters became legend throughout the American Southwest, inspiring others to stand up against injustice and corruption. But for Jack, the true reward was simpler: the knowledge that when faced with a choice between safety and righteousness, he had chosen correctly. In saving others, he had ultimately saved himself from a life of loneliness and regret. The frontier could be a harsh and unforgiving place, but it was also a land where individual courage could change the course of history. Jack McKenna proved that one person, acting from principle rather than self-interest, could indeed make a difference that would echo through generations.